In this video, we're going to talk about virtualization. We will start by discussing what virtualization is, what virtual machines are, we will understand why we need virtualization, and lastly, we'll talk about something called Type 1 virtualization. Let's think about our life before virtualization or without virtualization. Assume we have a Mac computer. That means that our hardware is running a Mac operating system, and the applications that are running on that operating system are specific to this operating system. So all the applications here will be designed to run on a Mac operating system. Now, if you have a Windows machine, then you will be running a Windows operating system, and all the applications that you will have on that Windows operating system are designed to run on the Windows operating system. Similarly, if you have a Linux machine, then you will be running a Linux operating system on that machine, and all the applications that you will be running on that machine are going to be designed specifically to run on Linux operating system. An example of that would be the LibreOffice or Thunderbird mail application that runs on a Linux operating system. That means if you want to use different applications on different operating systems, you will end up having 3 different computers. One is running the Mac operating system, one is running the Windows operating system, and one is running the Linux operating system. And on each of these computers, you will run specific applications that are designed to run on whatever operating system you are using at that time. Let's think about what virtualization does. To utilize the benefits of virtualization on our personal computers, we have to install an application called a hypervisor application. This application allows you to run multiple different operating systems on any operating system you are currently running on your computer. For example, if you are using a Mac operating system, you can install a hypervisor application called VirtualBox that will allow you to run multiple different operating systems on top of the same hardware you're using for your Mac. In the case that you are running a Mac operating system, we will refer to that one as your host operating system. A host operating system means that it's the main one that is installed on the hardware, and then the hypervisor or the virtualization software that we referred to in our previous slide will allow you to run different operating systems on top of your host operating system. Each box in this slide is referred to as a virtual machine and is running a different operating system. It is completely independent from your host operating system, and it is a full operating system by itself. But because it is sharing the same hardware as your host operating system and not running on its own hardware, we call it a virtual machine, not just a regular machine. So in this scenario that we're looking at here, we have a host macOS operating system and 2 virtual machines that are Linux and 2 Windows virtual machines. Here, I am sharing with you a screenshot from my VirtualBox application on my own Mac operating system. On the left side, you can see the virtual machines that I have installed on my VirtualBox application. If I need to start any one of them, I can simply click on it and then press start, and that will start it, and I will be able to use it without having to install that operating system on a separate piece of hardware. Virtualization comes with a few things to keep in mind. First of all, your hardware must support it, and it also must be enabled before you can start spinning up virtual machines on your host operating system. Enabling virtualization on different brands is very specific. For example, the way you can enable virtualization on a Dell computer can be different from the way you enable it on an HP computer. To know exactly how to do that on your manufacturer-specific computer, you can simply go to Google and type how to enable virtualization on, and then put the name of your computer manufacturer. Google will be very helpful, and it will tell you step by step how to do it. You also need to remember that hypervisors allow you to assign virtual resources to virtual machines. That means that you are always limited by your actual hardware resources. For a virtual machine to run, it needs disk space RAM, and CPU. So depending on the amount of CPU, RAM, and disk space that you have, you can run multiple virtual machines that do not exceed these resources. For example, if you have 16 gigabytes of RAM, then you can run 3 virtual machines and assign 2 gigabytes of RAM to each virtual machine such that you can have 6 gigabytes of RAM dedicated to these 3 machines if you're running them at the same time. Certainly, the VM's RAM will not be used if the VM is turned off. Also, virtual machines can be completely isolated from your network or configured to look like a real machine on your network. It's your choice. You can either have it contained within your operating system such that it doesn't appear on the network at all, or you can set it up in a way that makes it look like it's a real machine on the network that can be reached by other machines on the network. Each one of these scenarios has its own pros and cons. Finally, let's talk about why we need virtualization. The first reason would be learning different operating systems. So, if you're a Mac user or a Windows user and you want to learn Linux, then you can set it up as a Linux VM on your host operating system to start learning how to use Linux. That way, you do not have to buy an additional computer to learn the Linux operating system. You can also use a virtual machine to run unsafe code in an isolated environment. For example, if someone wants to do malware analysis, they certainly don't want to install malware or download malware on their host operating system that they use on a daily basis. So they can simply spin up a virtual machine, download that malware to that virtual machine, study it or analyze it as much as they want, and then at the end they can simply delete that virtual machine or revert it to a clean snapshot. We may also need virtualization to test code and applications on different operating systems. So let's assume that I'm developing an application that runs on Mac, Linux, and Windows. To test it, I do not have to buy 3 computers that have 3 different operating systems. I can simply use virtual machines that run different operating systems and test this code and applications on them. Now, let's talk about snapshots. When you're testing applications or running unsafe code, you may end up crashing the machine that you're using for that testing. And if that happens, you will need to spend a lot of time setting up the operating system again to resume your work. To avoid that, virtualization has a cool feature that's called a snapshot, which stores the state of a machine at a certain time such that if it crashes, you can revert back to that snapshot within seconds without having to spend hours installing an operating system from scratch. Finally, let's talk about Type 1 virtualization. Type 1 virtualization means that we're installing a hypervisor as the main host operating system on a piece of hardware. The hypervisor itself does not allow us to do what we can do with any of our usable operating systems like Linux, Windows, or Mac. Instead, its whole job is to be able to run virtual machines and manage dedicating resources to these virtual machines. And this is something that you may not see or use in the near future, but I just wanted to let you know that it exists. An example of that can be something called VMware ESXi, that is an operating system used for virtualization and is called a bare metal operating system. That's because it's the main operating system that gets installed on a server that has a lot of RAM, a lot of CPU, and a lot of storage. And it allows system administrators and IT professionals to create many virtual machines that can be used to run applications, databases, and so on.